My daughter had been looking forward to her cousin's birthday party for weeks. It wasn't just another family gathering to her, it was something she counted down to every single day, asking questions, making plans in her head, and imagining how much fun it would be. From the moment the invitation was mentioned, her eyes had lit up with excitement. She had pictured the balloons, the music, the cake, and the sound of everyone laughing together. To her, the party was more than just an event. It was a chance to feel included, to be part of the family in a way that made her feel special. She didn't see it as a gathering where appearances mattered. She only saw it as a day where she could play with her cousins and be wrapped up in the joy of the celebration. Every morning she would bring up the party in casual conversation, asking if her cousins would be wearing pretty dresses, or if there would be games she could join. She wanted to know if there would be her favorite snacks, if she could help pick out a small gift, and if her hair could be styled a certain way. All these little questions came from a place of pure childlike wonder. She was too young to think about judgments or criticism, too innocent to expect that anyone could look at her and decide she wasn't good enough. To her, the excitement was in the simple details, the thought of playing tag in the garden, blowing bubbles in the yard, or helping her cousin cut the cake while everyone clapped. She went through her closet with so much joy, running her fingers across the dresses she owned, twirling in front of the mirror, and asking me which one looked best. She didn't have a brand new dress to wear, but that didn't matter to her. Children don't measure their happiness by the price tag on their clothes. They measure it by how comfortable they feel and how much fun they think they can have. She finally chose a dress she loved, one she had worn before but still adored. She looked at herself in the mirror and smiled proudly, turning her head from side to side, smoothing down the fabric with small, careful hands, completely satisfied with how she looked. The sparkle in her eyes was the kind that every parent treasures, the kind that shows a child feels beautiful, ready, and confident. As the day of the party approached, her anticipation only grew. She asked what time we were leaving, if she could help wrap the gift, and even if she could carry the card herself. She prepared as though she was going to something grand and magical, not just another family birthday. She spoke about how much fun she would have with her cousins, already imagining them running around together, laughing until they were breathless. In her heart, she believed she would walk into that house and be greeted with warmth, hugs, and the joy of celebration. She thought of herself as part of it all, belonging there just like everyone else. On the morning of the party, she woke up earlier than usual. She ate her breakfast quickly, too distracted to focus on anything other than getting ready. She brushed her hair carefully, asking me to redo it when a strand slipped out of place. She didn't complain or get impatient. She simply wanted to look her best. She wanted to arrive with the kind of glow only a child can have when they're about to step into a moment they've been dreaming of. The house was buzzing with her energy, her little feet running up and down the hallway as she checked on the gift bag, peeked into the mirror again, and asked if it was time to go yet. Even as we drove to the party, she pressed her face against the car window, watching the world outside with a grin that stretched across her cheeks. She clutched the gift in her lap like it was the most important thing in the world. Her little heart was so full of joy and hope that she hummed a song quietly to herself, swaying slightly as if she was already dancing at the party in her mind. She kept asking how much longer until we arrived, too eager to sit still for more than a minute. She looked down at her dress again, smoothing it over her knees with care, making sure it stayed just right. She wanted to walk into that party with pride, not because she thought anyone would be judging her, but because she was proud of herself and the moment she was about to have. When we finally pulled into the driveway, she was almost bouncing with excitement. She hopped out of the car quickly, clutching the gift bag tightly, her smile as wide as the world. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation as she walked up the steps, looking up at the decorated doorway, the balloons tied to the railing, and the sound of laughter drifting from inside. In that moment, everything she had imagined felt real and within her reach. She was ready to step inside and join the celebration, to be part of the fun, to run to her cousins and share in the joy she had been dreaming about. Her heart was light, her spirit unshaken, and her mind filled only with the happiness of belonging to that special day. The moment we walked into the house, her smile was still shining, her little hands still clutching the gift she had brought with such pride. But that smile started to falter almost immediately. It didn't take long for the whispers to begin, for the glances to be exchanged between certain family members, for the unkind smirks to show up where she had expected nothing but warmth. She had walked in with the purest of intentions, thinking only about joining the laughter and being part of her cousin's special day, but instead, the first thing people seemed to notice was her dress. Not her excitement, not her glowing smile, not her happiness, just her dress. It wasn't sparkling enough, it wasn't new enough, it wasn't fancy enough to meet their silent, shallow standards. At first, she didn't understand. Children don't immediately pick up on cruelty disguised as politeness. She stood there holding out the gift bag, expecting to be met with gratitude, but the hesitation in their eyes said otherwise. Aunts exchanged glances, cousins whispered behind hands, and one sharp voice cut through, pointing out that she wasn't dressed nicely for the occasion. Those words hung heavy in the air, sharp like a knife, stripping her of the confidence she had built all week. She looked down at herself, suddenly unsure, her small fingers tugging nervously at the hem of her dress, her proud smile fading into confusion. There is something devastating about watching a child realize, for the first time, that they are being judged for something beyond their control. She had been so certain she looked lovely, that she was ready for the party, but now she was standing there, questioning her worth because someone else decided she didn't measure up. Her eyes flickered between me and the people speaking, as if silently asking if she had done something wrong. She wanted reassurance, but instead she was being pushed back, physically and emotionally, into a place where she was made to feel small. The harshness of their comments didn't stop at words. When the group began to move toward the decorated room where the party was in full swing, she wasn't invited to follow. Instead, she was nudged toward the kitchen, told it would be better if she stayed there. A quiet dismissal, a cruel suggestion wrapped in fake politeness, but its impact was shattering. To them, it was about appearances, about avoiding embarrassment in front of guests who might notice her dress wasn't up to their standard. To her, it was rejection, pure and simple. She had come expecting to belong, but now she was being pushed into the background like an unwanted shadow. As she sat there in the kitchen, the sounds of the party floated through the walls, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses, children shouting with joy. Every giggle from the living room was another reminder of the fun she wasn't allowed to join. She held her gift in her lap for a while, as if still hoping someone would come to get her, to include her, to tell her that none of it mattered and she could still be part of the celebration. But no one came. The gift sat unopened, the wrapping paper neat and untouched, while she tried to hold back the sting of tears. The unfairness of it all was crushing. She was too young to argue, too gentle to protest, too trusting to demand an explanation. Instead, she sat silently, staring at her dress, tugging at the sleeves, as if trying to find what was wrong with it. The more she listened to the laughter outside, the smaller she seemed to curl into herself. It was as though she was shrinking with every passing second, her light dimming under the weight of words she never should have heard. She didn't have the vocabulary to express how humiliated she felt, but it showed in her slumped shoulders, in the way her hands fidgeted nervously, in the way her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Children often don't remember every detail of a celebration, but they never forget the way they were made to feel. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about balloons or cake anymore. She wasn't thinking about games or laughter. She was only thinking about how she wasn't good enough to be there, how her dress had become the reason she was excluded. That kind of pain doesn't disappear quickly. It plants a seed of doubt that lingers in a child's mind, a cruel lesson that their value can be dismissed by something as superficial as clothing. The worst part was how casual it all seemed to the ones who dismissed her. To them, it was a simple decision. She didn't look the part, so she didn't belong. But to her, it was everything. It was the entire party, the entire joy, taken away in a single cruel judgment. She wasn't just being left out of games, she was being told, in actions louder than words, that she wasn't worthy of celebrating alongside the rest. As the party carried on in the other room, with music growing louder and voices rising in excitement, she stayed in the kitchen, silent and still. The decorations, the laughter, the smiles, all of it carried on without her, while she sat surrounded by the quiet hum of appliances and the echo of her own disappointment. A child who had walked in so full of life was now sitting invisible, not because she wanted to be, but because others had decided that her presence wasn't polished enough to match their shallow expectations. The kitchen was not where she had imagined spending her cousin's birthday. It wasn't filled with balloons or laughter, it wasn't the heart of the celebration. It was quiet, cold, and detached from the energy of the party. She sat there on a wooden chair, small and fragile, clutching her gift that no one had accepted, her ears straining to catch the sounds of joy coming from the other side of the wall. Every shout of laughter, every burst of music, every cheer when a game was won made her stomach sink further. She wanted to be there. She wanted to run around with the other kids, but instead, she was stuck in the kitchen, placed there as if she were an object to be hidden away rather than a child deserving of fun and love. She glanced at the doorway now and then, as if expecting someone to call her out, to change their mind, to tell her it was all a mistake. But no one came. The minutes stretched long, each one heavier than the last, and her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap. At one point, she traced little circles on the surface of the gift bag, her small way of keeping herself distracted, of pretending that she wasn't hearing the joy that excluded her. But no matter how much she tried to keep her mind busy, the sounds of the party found their way in, reminding her of what she was missing. The kitchen smelled faintly of food that had been prepared earlier, but even that scent was stale compared to the fresh excitement in the other room. The contrast was unbearable. The laughter outside was alive, bubbling, and constant, while inside the kitchen everything was still. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second dragging her deeper into the realization that she wasn't wanted there. She looked around the kitchen, the countertops stacked with unused plates, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the absence of any warmth, and it made her feel smaller, like she was being reduced to nothing more than a shadow of the celebration happening without her. At one point, she could hear her cousin's name being called loudly, followed by applause and cheers. They must have been opening presents. Her eyes darted toward her own gift, still resting untouched, and the hurt in her expression deepened. She had chosen it carefully, excited to see the joy on her cousin's face when it was opened, but now she realized that moment wasn't going to come for her. Her cousin would unwrap other presents, thank other people, smile at other gifts, but hers would remain sitting in her lap, unacknowledged. That small realization, layered on top of everything else, chipped away at her spirit even more. She rested her chin on her knees, hugging her legs close, as if curling into herself might shield her from the sting of exclusion. The voices from the other room grew louder as games started, the kind of games she loved to play. She could imagine the running, the shouting, the playful arguments, the bursts of energy that only children can create. She had dreamed of being part of it, of losing herself in that excitement, but instead, she was counting the tiles on the kitchen floor, trying to keep her tears from falling. Her little body shook slightly every time the laughter peaked, not from joy but from the reminder that she was outside of it all. She thought back to the morning, to how proud she had felt putting on her dress, how she had twirled in front of the mirror and smiled at herself. That memory now felt distant, almost like it belonged to a different child. The confidence she had built had been stripped away so quickly, and now all that remained was doubt. She wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe her dress wasn't good enough, if maybe she should have tried harder. A child shouldn't be forced to think such things, but in that kitchen, those thoughts clung to her like shadows. Time moved differently in that small space. 10 minutes felt like an hour, and an hour felt endless. No one checked on her, no one asked if she was okay, no one invited her to come out. The message was clear: she didn't belong. She sat quietly, listening to her own breathing, listening to the muffled sounds of happiness she was denied. She felt invisible, and in many ways, that was worse than being openly scolded. At least then she would have been acknowledged. Instead, she was hidden away, made irrelevant by the shallow judgment of others. Every once in a while, footsteps would pass by the kitchen door, quick and careless, heading to grab something before rushing back to the party. None of them stopped, none of them looked at her for more than a second. She was treated like furniture, something in the background. That casual neglect carved deeper into her than direct cruelty would have. Being forgotten, being dismissed, being left out of a family celebration was a punishment she hadn't earned. Her eyes grew tired from staring at the same surroundings, but she couldn't bring herself to close them. She didn't want to miss the chance in case someone finally called her, in case someone remembered she was there. She waited, quietly, holding on to the faint hope that maybe things would change, that maybe she would be given the chance to step into the laughter she craved. But each passing moment proved otherwise. The kitchen walls seemed to close in on her, trapping her in silence while the world she longed for remained just out of reach on the other side of the door. For a child, confidence is fragile, like glass that shines brightly when intact but shatters at the smallest crack. My daughter had walked into that party with her heart full, glowing with the kind of self-assurance that only innocence can provide. She had twirled in front of the mirror that morning, so sure of herself, so ready to be seen. Yet, sitting in that kitchen, the glow she carried with her began to fade. Each laugh from the other room chipped away at the joy she had built. Each passing second of exclusion made her question something she never should have had to question, her own worth. Her small hands, which had been so steady earlier when holding the gift, began to fidget nervously. She rubbed the fabric of her dress between her fingers, as if testing its texture, as if wondering why it wasn't enough. She tugged at the hem, smoothed the folds, checked the little bow near her waist, searching for a flaw that didn't exist. Every time she looked down at it, the doubt in her eyes grew. She no longer saw herself as the little girl who had proudly gotten ready for the party. Instead, she saw herself as the one who wasn't good enough to be allowed into the room where the fun was happening. The weight of humiliation pressed on her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. At her age, words like embarrassment or insecurity weren't ones she used, but the emotions were etched all over her face. The slump of her shoulders, the way she chewed on her lower lip, the sadness lingering in her gaze, all of it revealed how deeply she had been hurt. She had always been a child who loved to laugh, to ask questions, to chatter endlessly when she was happy. In that kitchen, however, silence replaced her voice. She barely moved, barely looked up, afraid that any noise she made would remind the others that she was still there, waiting for an invitation that would never come. Every rejection leaves behind a scar, and for a child, the scars from emotional wounds can shape how they see themselves. She had always believed that her family was her safe place, the people who would always include her, always lift her up. To discover that even among relatives she could be singled out and dismissed planted a seed of doubt in her mind. She began to wonder if maybe she didn't belong anywhere, if maybe she would always be the one overlooked. A child should never have to carry such thoughts, but the cruelty of that moment forced them onto her small shoulders. Her confidence wasn't only tied to that dress, it was tied to how she thought others saw her. Before that day, she had felt beautiful simply because she was happy. After being told her clothes weren't good enough, she began to connect her value with appearances. That dangerous idea, once planted, began to grow. She wondered if she would be accepted only if she looked a certain way, only if she wore what others approved of. It's heartbreaking to witness a child who once smiled so freely start to question whether her smile, her laughter, her very presence was worthy of being included. She tried to keep her emotions hidden, but children aren't skilled at masking pain. It seeped through in the way she stared at the floor, in the way she curled into herself as though making her body smaller would make the sting hurt less. Her eyes were glassy, not from outright crying, but from holding back the tears that threatened to spill. She blinked them away, too proud to let them fall, but the effort left her weary. The sparkle that had once lit her eyes that morning was gone, replaced by the dull shadow of disappointment and shame. The hardest part was knowing that this wasn't just about a single party. For her, it became a lesson about how people can treat you when you don't fit their standards. It was a moment that whispered to her that no matter how happy or excited she felt, others could take it away with a single careless comment. That realization dug into her, making her doubt herself in ways that no child should ever doubt. Instead of remembering the balloons or the cake, what stayed with her was the sting of exclusion, the echo of words that told her she wasn't good enough. In the days that followed, her behavior showed the lingering effects of what she had endured. She became quieter, hesitant to speak up the way she used to. She avoided talking about the party, though her cousins bragged about it afterward. When asked about her dress, she didn't light up like before. She looked away, as if ashamed of it. It wasn't just about clothing anymore, it was about the wound that had been carved into her confidence. She had been made to believe that what she wore could define whether or not she deserved to belong, and that idea lingered in her thoughts. Even in small, everyday moments, the change in her was clear. She hesitated when picking clothes in the morning, asking softly if what she chose looked nice enough. She sought reassurance in ways she hadn't before, her little voice carrying a weight that didn't belong to her age. It was as though she was carrying a question with her everywhere. Will they think I'm good enough today? That question, born from the humiliation of being isolated in a kitchen during a family party, was now woven into her self-image. Confidence, once broken, is not easily rebuilt, especially in a child who doesn't yet understand that worth comes from within. She had gone from a little girl brimming with excitement, ready to celebrate, to a child who second-guessed her every choice, unsure of her place, unsure of herself. And all of it stemmed from one cruel dismissal, one shallow judgment that told her she wasn't dressed well enough to be part of the joy happening just a few steps away from where she sat. When I saw her sitting there in that kitchen, shoulders slumped, eyes dull, holding a gift that no one cared to open, something inside me ignited. The kind of fire that only a parent feels when their child is treated unfairly, when the innocence of their happiness is stolen by careless cruelty. My daughter had walked into that house glowing with excitement, only to be shoved into a corner and made to feel less than the others. As her parent, I could not ignore it. I could not sit by and watch her spirit wither while others laughed freely in the next room. Every laugh that echoed from that party, every careless footstep past the kitchen door, every dismissive glance that told her she didn't belong, stoked the flames of my anger. The role of a parent is not just to feed, clothe, or shelter a child. It is to protect their heart, their sense of self, their belief that they matter. And in that moment, I knew my daughter's heart was breaking. The shine in her eyes that had carried her all morning was gone, replaced by a heavy silence. She wasn't complaining, she wasn't asking to leave, she wasn't crying out loud, but I didn't need words to know the damage was being done. Her small body, curled up on that chair, spoke louder than anything she could have said. My anger wasn't the wild, reckless kind. It was cold, steady, and sharp. It was the type that grows deeper with every second of injustice, the type that doesn't fade until it finds a way to balance the scales. I replayed everything in my mind, the way she had twirled in front of the mirror that morning, the way she had held the gift in her lap so proudly, the way she had rushed to the door with joy written across her face. All of it had been crushed under the weight of shallow judgment. How could anyone look at a child, so full of joy, and decide she wasn't good enough to be seen with the others? How could they choose to humiliate her instead of lifting her up? The thought made my chest tighten with rage. As her parent, it was unbearable to imagine that this would be the memory she carried of her cousin's birthday. I wanted to walk into that room, to confront every single person who had dared to look at her with disdain. I wanted to grab their shallow standards and tear them apart in front of them, to make them feel the sting they had inflicted on her. I imagined standing her proudly in the middle of the party, forcing them to look into her eyes, to see the hurt they had caused, to recognize the cruelty of their actions. But more than that, I wanted them to regret it. I wanted them to realize that dismissing my child, my daughter, wasn't something they could do without consequences. The protective instinct that rose in me was stronger than words. It wasn't just about the party, it was about every moment after. If I let this go, if I stayed quiet, what would it teach my daughter? That she should accept being mistreated? That her worth could be defined by others? That if she wasn't dressed a certain way, she deserved to be hidden away? No, I couldn't allow that lesson to take root. She needed to see that her parents stood for her, fought for her, valued her above the shallow judgments of anyone else. My mind turned over every detail of what had happened. The glances exchanged when we walked in, the pointed comment about her clothes, the subtle push toward the kitchen, the way no one defended her. It wasn't just cruelty, it was cowardice. They had chosen the easiest target, a child. They had decided that appearances mattered more than kindness, more than love, more than family. That thought fueled my resolve. If they believed they could reduce my daughter to tears and carry on with their celebration, as though nothing had happened, they were wrong. The anger that pulsed through me wasn't something that could be calmed with a deep breath or dismissed with patience. It was the kind that demanded action, demanded justice, demanded a response that would leave a mark. I looked at my daughter, sitting so quietly, trying to make herself smaller, and I knew I had to act, not just for her, but for the message it would send. She needed to know that no one, not even family, had the right to treat her that way. She needed to know that her parent would not let her pain go unanswered. Every parent dreams of giving their child the world, of shielding them from the harshness of life for as long as possible. But life has a cruel way of showing children that not everyone will be kind. And when that lesson comes too early, it is the parent's responsibility to soften the blow, to step in and show them that cruelty doesn't win. In that kitchen, as I watched her fragile confidence unravel, I felt that responsibility pressing down on me with a weight I couldn't ignore. I didn't raise my daughter to believe that her worth was tied to fabric or appearance. I didn't raise her to think she could be dismissed like an afterthought. I raised her to know her value, to stand tall, to believe in herself. And if others tried to strip that away from her, then it was up to me to fight back. My anger wasn't just about what had been done to her, it was about what it represented. It was about the toxic belief that a child's happiness could be measured by how expensive their clothes were. It was about the hypocrisy of a family that could celebrate one child while hiding another. As I sat there, watching her trace patterns on the gift bag with her tiny fingers, I made a silent vow. I would not forget this moment. I would not forgive the humiliation they had forced onto her. I would make sure they remembered it, not as a small cruelty they could laugh off later, but as a mistake that cost them far more than they ever expected. The fire in me burned steady, and my only thought was how to turn that fire into the kind of revenge that would make them wish they had never looked twice at my daughter's dress. Revenge is not always loud or violent. Sometimes it is quiet, deliberate, and steady, designed not just to satisfy anger, but to teach a lesson that will echo for years. As I sat in that kitchen with my daughter, watching her shrink into herself while the sounds of laughter floated in from the other room, my mind was already shaping the path forward. I knew I couldn't erase what they had done to her, but I could make sure it would never be repeated. I could ensure that the people who thought it was acceptable to humiliate a child would feel the sting of their choices every single time they looked around their own home. It began with a simple decision. If they thought my daughter wasn't good enough to sit in their decorated living room, then they would soon understand what it meant to depend on someone they dismissed. I had resources, I had leverage, and I had patience. Their home, the very place where they had excluded her, would eventually become tied to me in ways they hadn't foreseen. Every wall, every door, every corner of that house would remind them of the day they pushed my child into the shadows. The plan unfolded step by step. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to create a scene at the party. That would have only given them the satisfaction of thinking I was overreacting. Instead, I left quietly, carrying my daughter's hurt in my heart like fuel. I studied their circumstances, their needs, their vulnerabilities. And when the opportunity came, I took it without hesitation. Their financial struggles became my opening. Their desperation became my advantage. Slowly, carefully, I placed myself in the position they could no longer ignore. The house they once flaunted as the center of family gatherings soon became my property. The place where my daughter was hidden away became the place they would pay me to live in. The irony of it was sharp and satisfying. Each month, when they handed over rent, I saw the flicker of resentment in their eyes. But beneath it, I also saw shame. They couldn't escape the knowledge that they were living in a home that now belonged to me, the very person they had treated so casually. They couldn't host a single gathering, couldn't decorate for a single holiday, without remembering that the roof over their heads was tied to the child they had humiliated. And that was the point. I wanted them to live with the weight of that memory, to be haunted by the choice they made when they decided my daughter wasn't dressed well enough to be part of their celebration. For my daughter, I made sure she never knew the details of my plan. I didn't want her to carry the heaviness of revenge. What I wanted for her was healing, for her to rebuild her confidence, to grow into someone who understood her worth had nothing to do with appearances. But behind the scenes, I carried out every move with her in mind. Every rent payment they made, every request they had to bring to me as their landlord, was a reminder that cruelty doesn't go unanswered. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about power, it was about balance. When they decorated that house for the next family event, I knew the memories of what they had done would hang heavier than the balloons or streamers. When they prepared meals in that kitchen, they would remember the little girl who had been forced to sit there alone. When they looked out their windows at the yard where children once played, they would see my daughter's absence and know that it was their fault she had been excluded. My revenge was not to ruin them, but to remind them every single day that their actions carried consequences. Over time, their attitude shifted. They grew quieter, less confident in their smug judgments. The ones who had whispered about my daughter's dress now avoided eye contact when they saw me. They could not escape the truth that they had handed me the perfect weapon, their reliance on the very thing they once used to hurt us. Their home, their pride, their supposed symbol of status, now belonged to the parent of the child they had tried to diminish. That was the justice I had crafted, subtle but undeniable. The beauty of it was in its permanence. Parties would come and go, children would grow older, but the house would remain, standing as a monument to the lesson I had delivered. They could not walk through their front door without feeling the weight of their mistake. They could not enjoy their comforts without remembering the cost of their cruelty. And each time they wrote out a rent check, each time they acknowledged me as the one who held authority over their space, the humiliation they had inflicted on my daughter was returned to them in a way they could never escape. For me, revenge was never about shouting in the moment. It was about patience, about letting the sting last longer than a single confrontation. It was about ensuring that every smile they forced at future gatherings was shadowed by the knowledge of who truly held control. And as I watched them struggle with the quiet shame of their dependence, I felt a sense of balance restored. They had tried to strip my daughter of her confidence, but in the end, it was their own pride that had been dismantled.